Discussing the worlds I have created. Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. I received a few questions after I did my video, Do Not Create Encounters, Create Worlds Instead. So I thought I'd sort of take a trip down memory lane and talk about some of the worlds I've created over the years. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since the very early days when od&d was the only thing that came out, and I remember when Blackmore was published because it wasn't available when I first bought the game. It was just the 3 books in Greyhawk, and then Blackmore was the next thing. That was before the Dragon magazine existed, when the Strategic Review was the magazine from TSR. Or actually Tactical Studies Rules, which was their original name, and they changed it to TSR. And few people know that. So on the screen you see this is one of my maps, fairly early, not my earliest maps. I've lost those. That's a long story, but I lost some of my earliest maps. This one was drawn by hand. I think this was a Judges Guild hex grid. I'm not sure. And you notice that it was drawn in 4 colors with 4 pens. I had a blue, a red, a green, and a brown. And I don't really remember an awful lot about this. I know this was the swamp, and these were trees, and these were mountainous areas, and there was a city here, and all of this out here was ocean. So that's one of my earliest maps that I have around, and it even has some sort of food stain up at the top, if you can see that. So that was one of my earliest maps. Around 1998, I bought a copy of Campaign Cartographer 2. And the reason I know 1998 is this map, I put my copyright date, 1998. But this was the first, well, okay, with some modifications. Let me explain. This was the first map I drew. This was of a world. This was Tiglath. This is the world of Tiglath, and I drew it. This little part here, if you notice, is actually on this map here, which was Lambent Steppe. So I built the world of Tiglath. Tiglath has always been a Bronze Age world. That was something that I wanted to do, as World of Tiglath was Bronze Age. It's always been Bronze Age from back in the 1998, at least, was when this file was dated. And these were the main areas of the campaign. What happened was I changed the campaign, and for a period of time I ran Lambent Steppe. And I started, when I drew this map, I like this peninsula. This is the peninsula of Pinge. So if I zoom in, you see the peninsula of Pinge. I like that for whatever reason. It made sense. I wanted the characters to start here and knew that they would have to wander up the entire length of the peninsula. This is about the size of Florida, was the idea that I wanted there for the peninsula of Pinge, so it would give me a nice area. And I started drawing this up, and I actually drew up some more detailed maps of the peninsula of Pinge. This is Campaign Cartographer 3, but this was originally drawn up in Campaign Cartographer 2. And I liked the peninsula of Pinge so much that I ended up cutting it out and pasting it over in the world of Tiglath here. And I have been using that ever since, because it works out that though I've drawn the entire world, I tend to, almost all the campaign focuses on this little narrow strip here, which, like I said, is about the size of Florida. Pasting that in, grafting that in, by the way, caused some interesting problems with the world of Tiglath, because the scale was to make it look right on the map, and the scale. So the world of Tiglath is kind of odd. It's about twice the diameter of Earth, though, so we don't get that one. But this brings up the question is, how did I get into thinking about the economics? And you can see this over here. This is what made me start thinking about economics. These are the symbols that came in Campaign Cartographer 3, and some of them were in Campaign Cartographer 2, which was the predecessor to this. So you had grain, and you had fruits and horses, and you could start marking the economic markers on the map, like this is where pears or whatever, apples, olives, sheep. You could put seashells to mark what was there for your economics. This literally, it started me thinking the tools in the drawing tool to allow me to mark certain areas for economic purposes was something that I did. I'd never marked them. I always kept notes outside of, but it started to make me think about that how did the economies work? What was traded? And I always came back to various discussions. He says, we have necessities and luxuries. What are necessities in life and what are luxuries? Well, necessities in life are food and water. You need food and water to live. We live in a very luxurious world today. We ship water from all over the world to us because we think the water tastes better. Well, that's a real luxury, because think about it. You have to ship the water, and you have to ship the water in such a way that it doesn't acquire different tastes. If you know anything about the ancient Rome, that was there. So you didn't ship water. You drank the water that was local, however it tasted, because you had to have water. And food preservation is how many of the things that we eat today came about. You'd look at kimchi. It was a method of preserving cabbage. You have pickles, are a method of preserving various vegetables. You have jerky, which was a method of preserving meat. Smoking was a method of preserving meat. Sausages are methods of preserving meat. So you had all these things that's how our diets came about. Today we don't think anything. We go to the grocery store, you see all these things that are on the shelves, and you look at and you can pick them up. But in the ancient world, even going back a couple hundred years, or where most fantasy settings are, you didn't have refrigeration, you didn't have a lot of the technology about filtering water and so on, so you were sort of stuck with the water that you had, you were stuck with what kind of food you had, and salt was a very important preservative that was, that's where we get the word salary from, if you go looking up where salary or a person is worth their salt, because that was important preservation mechanism to keep foods, and it improved the flavor of foods. And then spices. And I don't know if you all studied, it was the spice trade in the ancient world, of how the spices came from the Far East across into Europe, and that led for transportation of all the everything from pasta and different kinds of food preparation and medicines and knowledge came across the Silk Road, I think is what it was called, because that was the trade route. Silk was brought. So those became luxuries. Spices became luxuries. Pepper at one point in time was extremely expensive. That's arguably why Columbus sailed to the New World in search of a shorter path to get spices. At least that's what we were taught in school. So, but we can argue, but it does create a reason for people to go searching for bringing different things in. And I've tried in various ways to introduce some of that into the worlds I've had. I take a look at what would happen how would they preserve food in one particular area? What would they like? What would the trade mechanisms be? Because it causes you to think about what's common in this area is not common in another area. That's where you get copper. Maybe you may have high copper content in a particular area in the ground, so you would have the copper mines there, and they would melt and smelt the copper, and you'd have silver mines and gold mines and iron mines, and those were all important because that's where the material was naturally. If you've played Civilization or whatever, one of the Civilization games, you've seen that where there are the symbols on the map showing the different kind of resources that were available. And you think about how that affects your world that you're creating. And it's really not hard. You draw up the world, like I said. I drew up my first map, which, let's see if I can switch back over here. This was my first map, one of the earliest maps. It's not my first, that's gone. But one of the earliest, and it was with the Judges Guild map, where each hex is 5 miles across. And so this was an early map. And then I drew World of Tiglath, and then I whirled Lambent Steppe, and I stole the Peninsula of Pinge and grafted it from here and back into the world of Tiglath. Then more recently, in the past few years, I decided to create yet another world called Amoras. And I used a different tool for that one. I used Fractal Terrains, which is again for Pro Fantasy. They make Campaign Cartographer. And this is the world of Amoras. This is what Fractal Terrains creates. It's a fractal world showing all of this. It's great. And I then, you can export this into Campaign Cartographer. And this is the world of Amoras in Campaign Cartographer. And it automatically creates a bunch of things for you in there. But you can, if you're in Fractal Terrains, you can say, oh, file, new, and synthetic world, and you just go through next, finish, and it will create, okay, that created the same world. Let's do file, new, synthetic world. Let's get a random seed, next, finish. So this creates a completely different map, and you can export it and do various things with it. So it's a nice tool, as you see this drawing in, particularly if you're running in 4K. I'm trying to save this image as in 4K, so you can see the nice resolution that this gives you. It gives you a nice looking map. You can do overlays. I really don't use it that much. I've created a few worlds with this because this is even much faster. This allows me to create a world. There are other tools out there. I'm sure there are tools. And you could, like I said, you could always go back to a piece of paper and a pencil and draw it. The thing that I got into, and that was from drawing the maps, was I started thinking about how easy it was to specify where the crops were growing. It started making me think about that, about trade routes, because then that sets up trade between the various countries and various areas. That obviously sets up, then you decide what kind of government. When I drew up Tiglath, I decided these are the names of the continents and these are the names of the countries. And there are divisions based upon, there are actually divisions based upon normally rivers or some geographic feature which separates the various regions. And Greth, we have this is a large plain here. This is the country of Greth. And Marazar, I know, anyway, that's Marazar is over here. They were along these plains. And this is where the major conflict was occurring in the world of Tiglath. But you have all these other continents, and I sort of just outline them. But in general, you focus in on a small piece and create that. But if you start creating this, and I have more detailed maps of this where I've drawn this up, but I started working out the trade routes of what was happening. And again, I took a look at we have, how would the trade come from here? And I worked out a trade route from over here along the coastline down to here and then up into here, because this was, so they were trading cinnamon and cardamom, which were the primary spices that I was interested in moving along at this point, because it's easy to pick a spice. And you have pepper and cinnamon and cardamom, and I worked out some of the trade routes there so that was happening along the ocean. And because this is a Bronze Age world, people didn't venture out to sea very far, because that was just something you didn't do. So you can create your world fairly quickly and fairly easily just by, pick up a piece of paper. This is in GIMP, and I'm sure you can find some graphics and do it on the computer, because that I think is the better way to do it than doing it by hand. But if again, I've done it by hand and just drop a world. And when you start thinking about the trade and thinking about how that affects the people, then it creates the environment, and it creates a more realistic at least to me, a more immersive environment for people. So this is some of the worlds that I've created. I've created this one. I don't remember what I called this one. And then I created the world of Tiglath, and I created the world of Lambent Steppe, and then I created the world of Amoris. And the world of Amoris is actually, no, this isn't the world of Amoris. Let's go back. This is the world of Amoris. Amoris is interesting in that it has one continent and two oceans. You could argue there's the Northern Ocean and there's the Southern Ocean. This is a just rolled out display, because there's only one continent and a island over here. And all of the adventures occurred down actually in this little small spot that when I was running the campaign of World of Amoras. World of Amoras was an adult level adventure. But this is the World of Amoras, and it's sort of interesting because you have a northern sea and a southern sea and one continent with land bridge almost all the way around. It was sort of interesting, and that was just the way the random number generated it. And there's 4 lakes down in this area here. I can't even remember if I zoom in, well, that's how you zoom in, but it's, yeah, okay, so we can see here, this is there. We can scroll that over. Let's see, don't know how this is going to, it's slow, even though I've got a relatively fast computer, but it's allows you to zoom in and see the details of an area in fractal terrains. Fractal terrains is fairly slow, and I normally export. Don't particularly like the way the rivers show up, but they actually make sense that they're based upon fractals. And so this is, I think there's 4 lakes. Yeah, this is the 4 lake area that, actually, if I remember correctly, I calculated the volume of that. That's about equivalent to the Great Lakes. They're actually fairly large lakes on this world. And this is almost equal to the Great Lakes area. But this was the world of Amoras. And it's the most recent one I populated that I was running the game on. So this is how I've created the worlds. And I'd like to hear about the worlds you've created. You don't have to go as much detail as I have. And with today's tools, you can create a world very quickly, and you can design up trade routes very quickly. When I designed up the trade routes for the world of Tiglath with the goblins and the Shawagin, I think is the way you pronounce it. I'm terrible at that. Shawagin, when I looked it up on one pronunciation, that it only took me about 10 minutes to work that out. and so on. So I encourage you to think more about generating your worlds. Give it a try. See what you can come up quickly, and I think your players will appreciate your efforts. Thank you for watching my video. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. I appreciate all your comments. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. I appreciate both forms of feedback. If you're new here and would like to subscribe, you can click on the icon on the left. If you're interested, there's more content on the right.